Welcome to the channel, everyone. This is JJAtkinsArt, and today we're going to be doing a really deep dive into a non-celebrity based caricature. We have a volunteer to pose for some photographs for me, and we're going to take a very close look at getting together a sketch, finding resemblance, and even doing some value studies with some cross-hatching and some other techniques to kind of make some plans about how we're going to deal with shadow and light. So stay tuned. We're going to dive into it in just a second. And again, welcome to the channel. This is Drawn Jessi. It's a pretty cold morning here, day before Thanksgiving, and I got a warm cup of tea in my hand. Right down the street from where I live, there's a bar that I've been frequenting recently, and there's a number of bartenders there that have been kind enough to volunteer to pose for some pictures so I can do some caricatures. And this is another in those series. This is Jessi, and we're going to use her as our model today for the drawing. Now, I had a couple of pictures of her I was able to take, but there's one I'll just kind of put up in the upper left-hand corner there that served as the main basis for the caricature that you're seeing developed right now. As I mentioned before, her name is Jessi, and one of the things I think maybe just bear mentioning right off the bat here is that I met her very recently. We don't know each other all that well, but she's a very nice lady, and one of the things that I was just struck with immediately the second I met her was her prominent cheekbones. Something I made comment on pretty much immediately as soon as I met her, and based off the fact that she was aware of me from having drawn some other caricatures of the other staff there, she understood why I was making such a comment and was able to, kind of strike up a conversation that led to me getting these pictures and ultimately the caricature you're seeing developed. Now, if we speak a little bit to the development method here, you can notice that I start very loose, very sketchy and almost messy. First, one or two passes at this aren't meant to look for a resemblance as much as I'm looking for just an overall shape. I'm trying to fit all the facial features in, more of a head shape, if you will. Again, the cheekbones are really prominent here, and even though the picture doesn't really kind of do this justice, if you see her in live and in person, and there's some slightly different lighting here, you can see that the widening of the face was really the way to kind of go with this exaggeration. It allowed me space to kind of get her eyes in there, but also really kind of develop a really good likeness of her mouth and the laugh lines that go around her mouth. So there's a few things that we're working on here in terms of the exaggeration. We're not just focusing just on cheekbones. There's a few other opportunities to dive into that resemblance. And the mouth and that very unique smile gives us opportunity there also. Now, again, this picture here that we're using is just an inspiration for the caricature. We're doing more of a heads-on, face the camera type angle than the slightly turned look we're seeing in that picture. And I think it bears mentioning here that this is not the only picture I used. I had about 4 or 5 that I was using for reference here, and that's why we're not going to follow this picture exactly. We're using it as a loose reference, and we can take some license with it. Now, one of the other things that I think probably should be pointed out here is that if we're speaking to some facial features and identifying areas that we want to exaggerate, we can certainly talk about the nose, which is a little bit pointy, but we didn't do a large exaggeration on that because of that face on view. But the neck also, I think, bears mentioning too. Jessi has a very prominent neck, and the way we chose to exaggerate that is really just to kind of make it long and skinny, and it kind of helped fit in with the long, flowing hair that she has with her as well. Now, as far as caricatures are concerned, the obvious focus here is the face, but the exaggerated neck really kind of helped lend to the balance that we're trying to achieve between, the exaggerations in the upper portion of the head and the shrinking of things down in the kind of below the eyes, so to speak. All right. So maybe I didn't do a good enough job explaining this, but I've mentioned this in other videos. My first approach when it comes to looking at a head and that I'm trying to caricature is to divide it in half, to draw a line roughly around where the eyes are and determine really where the most of the mass just seems to be showing up. If you have a lot of mass below the eyes, we kind of focus some exaggeration there. If there's a lot of mass above the eyes, then we'll focus the exaggeration there. And the idea is to kind of work in opposites. If you're exaggerating something, say in the lower portion of the face, then you're going to shrink it up top to create some sense of balance. Loosely put, we might call this conservation of mass. If we're going to make something larger somewhere, we got to make something smaller elsewhere to kind of compensate for it. Now, again, the focus here is on the face, obviously, but we want to have at least some sort of a slight narrative in here in the composition. So, in third or fourth pass in this, it's time to kind of determine what action Jessi's going to be taking. And in this case, it's just something simple, pouring a shot. I don't want to detract much from the face that we want to kind of have as the main focus of our subject here. And to that effect, I'll kind of point out that the approach here in this layer of drawing, this third or fourth or fifth version of it, is that I want to start working in value study. This is something I really wanted to take some opportunity to discuss on this video. So to begin, just bear in mind here that everything leading up to a final ink version of this coming later is done with the same brush. It's a sketch pencil brush that's provided automatically in the PROCREATE tool. Nothing special, in other words. The only thing that I do is I make sure I try to change up the thickness of the line. Line weight does a really, really good job of helping to sell three-dimensionality and, make things pop off the page. And that's really kind of the point here. The value study that I'm doing in the form of a crosshatch is meant to really exemplify where the lights and the shadows lie so I can get an idea of how I'm going to be painting this later. Ultimately, as an ending effect, remember the cheekbones are going to be the main focus of exaggeration, so I want eyes drawn towards there, and that means the more I can get accuracy in the light and shadow, the more I can create an illusion of three-dimensionality, the more the eyes are going to be drawn towards that, and I pull off the effect I'm trying to pull off. Now, there's some other things I'm going to put in some detail into as well. Her mouth is unique. Her smile is unique. I want to make sure I draw eyes to that as well. So the laugh lines should be as accurate with the shadowing as I can get them. So once I got that value study done, it was time to kind of take it to another level. Cross-hatching is effective, but what I did was made a copy of that cross-hatching layer, saved the main copy so that way I can come back to it if I want to later, and then use the copy that I made to smudge up some things and try to get this more of an accurate value study. Now, I'll warn ahead of time, I wasn't really happy with the way this turned out in the long run, but a value study this way can be a very effective tool if you're trying to kind of get an idea of how to kind of create balance on your shadows and lights. Ultimately, when a value study is complete, you should have the full range from stark white to stark black and everything in between. And once you remove color out of it, trying to focus on values is a really kind of good exercise to kind of build up that artistic eye that you need to do things like this. I've done it with some success in the past, but it's not my favorite technique. And the only reason why is because you're really just delaying the application of color. And adding color is one of my favorite things to do in this. So it's almost like, you're putting off the thing that I'm enjoying the most. And it's just not an effect that is always 100% something that works for me. So I did some work with it here. I got some highlights in on the nose a little bit and in the forehead, but ultimately just wasn't completely satisfied with it and decided to save that layer, but not work with it to the end. Instead, we're going to put this away in just a second. We're going to pull out our old sketch layer and we're going to use that as a basis to start doing our final inks, which is a typical method I'm used to. Now, what I'm doing here is starting with the eye and trying to lay in some of the line work, but what I'm trying to be more conscious of than anything else is, again, that line weight mentality. So if line weight is not a term you're familiar with, all it really means is that there are certain areas where you want thicker lines and certain areas where you want thinner lines. And when you're trying to get to some sort of a final pen and ink drawing in this form, those line weights make a big difference in trying to sell three-dimensionality. And to a certain degree, it's almost intuitive. Think of it this way. The more your line is meant to be in shadow, the thicker the line should be, because that's what black and white pen and ink is all about, is using your ink to represent shadow. And anything that's in absence of ink is where light would be. It's kind of a simplistic way to think about it, but that helps kind of explain where thick and thin goes. And from a more general level, bold outline, thicker line, and when you go inside the bold outline and get into detail, thinner lines go there. Now, I like to start with a really good pen and ink before I go into color. But ultimately, that pen and ink drawing isn't really going to survive this process. I'm going to use the ink lines to be able to kind of get some color in quickly and put in some of the basic lights and shadows, some of the initial layers that are going to kind of approach those sorts of things. But as I get more and more detailed, the more and more I'm going to try to hide my lines or even just erase them completely. So even though I spent a lot of time building up to a pen and ink layer, ultimately it's just not going to survive this process. And to be honest with you, sometimes it does. If you go back through some of my videos, you will see some where the line work stays intact, some where it's partially hidden and partially intact. And in this case, we're going to hide it completely and try to give more of a caricature, but portrait type caricature painting. So you can see I've already done that with the nose. Basically, I got enough shadow laid in with the nose and enough light laid in with the nose that it's pretty clear where that nose fits on the face, and it has a three-dimensionality that's achieved without the need of the line work to kind of back it up. And that's the goal for this particular painting. Wherever it is that I can kind of achieve that three-dimensionality, that illusion of 3D with just light and shadow, then I can hide the lines. Sometimes even delete them completely. Now, most of this is kind of done in the face, obviously, but I'm trying to apply as much of that as I can to the body and the bottle and the rest of the action as well. Not 100% successful. There is going to be some line work I didn't hide, and it's mostly coming back to that idea of what I tried to mention before. I'm not trying to get a lot of focus on other areas other than just the face. The face is going to be as perfect as I can make it, and everything else is going to be, a little bit more of what you'd expect out of a caricature, more of the cartoon aspect of things. Now, I will address it here really quick, even though it hasn't come up on the picture yet, but the background is something that may draw some questions, so I'll just kind of get this out of the way really quick. The background is just a photograph of the bar where Jessi works, and all I've done is just kind of zoom in on it and blur it a little bit, so that way I can put her in some sort of an environment. I didn't want to spend an enormous time developing background. It would have taken just way too long, and as is, this video was a long time coming. I will admit that I made this picture really about a month ago, and it's taken me up until now to get the video done. So let me just kind of point out a couple things here really quick while I'm slightly off topic. It's been a little while since I've done one of these videos, but I have a few drawings in the can that I'm going to be working on and publishing in the near future. So going into the next month or so, you'll see a little bit more of an uptick in videos because I've got just kind of a backlog to get through. Second, if you haven't had a chance yet, take a moment to subscribe. I have had a few new subscribers recently, but it is the subscriptions and the comments certainly as well that really kind of encourage me to try to put more artwork out there. So if you're liking what I'm doing, let me know and I will do more of it. I can assure you of that. That being said, we're kind of getting into final end stage here of our portrait, so I'll just kind of mention a couple of other things and we'll kind of get into a summary of what's going on. Ultimately, last step here is to get into the hair. If you remember from the initial photograph, the reference photographs, Jessi has multicolored hair. She's got kind of a more of a dirty blonde thing going in certain portions, and she's kind of bleached or dyed some of the strips in her bangs and surrounding her face a little bit. With some highlights. So I tried to represent that as best I could, but ultimately, I'm not sure I necessarily pulled off the blonde as well as I could have, but I tried to get as close to it as I possibly could. And I thought it really did a good and effective job of trying to frame her face a little bit and make her pop from the background a little bit more. So it may not look as realistic as the rest of the face, but I think that it achieved the job of creating a frame, which is what the intent was to begin with. So here's our final product. We're all said and done. Let's just take a little bit of a review. Very, very messy sketch where we just threw out a map of where to put in some basic facial features. Second layer tries to get into building a little bit more of the resemblance. And once we get resemblance, we can bring in the body and start getting a little bit more of a value study done. Ultimately, we threw away value study, settled on an ink sketch, used that to put in some color. So we got our base colors in there. And through hiding lines and some special effects of light and shadow, we get our final product. There's Jessi showing it off. She was pretty happy with the end result, and I was happy to be able to print a copy of this for her. So if you'd like what you see, again, don't forget, subscribe, share. I'll be back soon with some more content. Thanks for stopping by. Oh, and by the way, happy Thanksgiving.